The night had fallen, and heavy rain poured down on the small town of Hawthorne Ridge, Kentucky, a quiet place nestled deep within dark, foreboding forests. The pitch-black night blanketed everything, broken only by the sound of wind howling through the trees and rain tapping against rooftops. Charlie, a 20-year-old college student, sat alone in his small room, his eyes absent-mindedly gazing out the window. The damp, dimly lit room, illuminated by a faint yellow glow, added to the cold atmosphere. Thoughts of mounting debt weighed heavily on his mind, leaving him feeling overwhelmed and trapped. Charlie had fallen into debt months ago due to failed gambling bets, hoping for a stroke of luck, but fate had not been on his side. To repay the debt, he had been forced to take a job delivering food for a small restaurant in town. It wasn't his dream job, but he had no other choice. The money he earned helped him get by and chip away at the debt, while the loan sharks relentlessly demanded payment. The phone rang, shattering the stifling silence. Charlie picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was an order from the restaurant. He sighed, weary at the thought of heading out on a night like this. But he needed the money, and turning down the order meant losing an income he couldn't afford to lose. Address is 246 Ridgeway Road, Charlie muttered, his eyes scanning the address on the screen. It was a place he'd never heard of, located in a remote suburban area near the edge of the forest. He frowned slightly, wondering why anyone would place an order from such a secluded location in the middle of the night. But he brushed off the questions, quickly throwing on his jacket and grabbing his car keys. As he stepped outside, a gust of icy wind hit his face, carrying moisture from the downpour. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by faint streetlights that cast pale reflections on the puddles below. Distant thunder rumbled, signaling the approach of a storm. Charlie opened the door of his old, worn-out car and started the engine. It roared to life with effort, groaning under the strain of the harsh weather. He followed the GPS directions, driving away from the town center, heading toward the desolate outskirts. The farther Charlie drove, the more winding and dark the road became. Dense forests lined both sides of the road, with only the weak headlights of his car illuminating the muddy path ahead. The rain grew heavier, pounding against the windshield. Every so often, he glanced at his phone to check the directions, and an uneasy feeling started creeping into his mind. It seemed the longer he drove, the more isolated and cold the surroundings became. The GPS indicated that he was nearing his destination, but all he could see around him was the endless darkness of the forest. No houses appeared in sight, no signs of life. Charlie pulled the car to a stop, squinting through the thick curtain of rain, but all he saw was a haze of mist covering the road. Suddenly, the car's headlights cast a faint glow on the silhouette of an old, dilapidated house emerging in the distance, nestled among the dark trees. The house looked long abandoned, with crumbling walls and shattered windows. This was 246 Ridgeway Road, the address he was supposed to deliver to. Charlie swallowed hard, a chill running down his spine as he stared at the house. An instinctive sense of dread told him he shouldn't be there, but there was no time for hesitation. He needed to deliver the food and leave quickly. Turning off the engine, he stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. His footsteps squelched in the muddy ground, echoing in the eerie stillness, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he approached the front door, it unexpectedly creaked open. It wasn't locked, it just opened on its own, as if someone had been waiting for him. Charlie took a step back, staring into the darkness beyond the doorway. There was no sign of life, but the heavy, chilling silence surrounding the house made him shudder. They must be doing some renovations. Charlie muttered to himself, trying to calm his nerves, but the unease lingered. He took a cautious step inside, the light from his phone casting eerie shadows within the house, and he could sense a strange presence waiting for him here. This terrifying story was just beginning, and Charlie had no idea he was about to step into the worst nightmare of his life. Charlie's car sat parked in front of the old, decrepit house. The sounds of the rain and wind whistling through the cracks in the broken windows, the only noises left. The feeling of unease grew stronger as he stood before the wide-open door. The house was dark and rotting, as if it had been forgotten for years. The large door creaked ominously, as though it were a warning from the other side. Inside, the thick darkness seemed to swallow the faint light from his phone. "It's just a delivery job," Charlie reassured himself. He took another step into the house, and with a sudden click, the door behind him slammed shut, causing his heart to leap. The light from his phone filtered through his trembling fingers, casting a dim glow on the cracked, dust-covered walls draped with cobwebs. The air inside the house was heavy and damp, the smell of mildew mixed with the rancid stench of something long decayed. Charlie's throat felt dry, and a shiver ran down his spine. He called out in a loud voice, trying to mask his growing fear. "Hello, did someone order food?" There was no response, only the echo of his own voice bouncing back in the empty space. Charlie glanced around, searching for any sign of life, but the house was deathly silent. Cracked walls, creaking floorboards underfoot, and shattered windows allowed the wind to whistle through, creating eerie murmurs that sounded like whispers from the darkness. He stepped into the living room, where the faint light from his phone revealed a torn, dusty sofa. The room looked as if it had been abandoned for decades, with everything frozen in place, long forgotten. There was no sign of life, no one waiting for the food. The deeper he ventured into the house, the more his fear grew. Charlie decided to put the food bag on the table and leave immediately. But just as he was about to do so, a noise echoed from the far end of the hallway, heavy footstep followed by the creaking of wood. He spun around, heart pounding in his chest. His phone's light shone down the long, dark hallway. There was no one there, yet the sound of footsteps persisted, getting closer, as if something was moving through the shadows. "Hello," he called again, his voice trembling. There was no reply, only the sound of footsteps growing louder. This time, the door at the end of the hallway slowly creaked open with a piercing screech. Charlie edged closer, his heart pounding in his chest. His limbs felt cold and stiff, his body almost paralyzed with fear. Every step toward the end of the hallway felt like a descent into a world he never wanted to enter. Standing before the door, Charlie hesitated. He knew he shouldn't go in, but curiosity and an invisible fear pulled him forward. The door was open just enough for him to glimpse inside a small room with rotting wooden floors. But something sent chills down his spine. Through the cracks between the wooden planks, a faint, eerie light flickered from below, accompanied by strange, unsettling whispers. Charlie took a step back, a sense of dread washing over him. He wanted to run, to escape the house, but his body was anchored by a horrifying curiosity. "It's probably just my imagination," he muttered, trying to reassure himself. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this house. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through, flinging open the bathroom door nearby. It felt as if something had just escaped from within. A heavy sigh, almost like it came from the depths of the earth, reverberated through the air. Charlie froze, his entire body stiff with terror. The darkness in the house seemed to stretch infinitely, and in that moment, he realized he was not alone. At that moment, a soft, eerie laugh echoed from deep within the house. drifting through the air from behind Charlie. He spun around, startled, but saw no one. A freezing gust of wind blew past him, carrying a foul stench, as if it came from some ancient, forgotten place. Charlie couldn't take it anymore. He turned, ready to sprint out of the house, but the front door was now tightly shut. When had that happened? He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. But the unease he had felt before had morphed into full-blown terror. This house, this darkness, something was terribly wrong. And Charlie knew that if he didn't get out now, something horrifying was bound to happen. Just as he stepped toward a window, hoping to find an escape, another sound rang out, this time from beneath the floor. The ground under Charlie's feet trembled slightly, as if something was moving beneath the house. "No way," Charlie whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with fear as he stared down. He had come face to face with something that didn't belong to this world. Charlie stood frozen in the dark room, holding his breath as he listened. Beneath his feet, the floor creaked softly, vibrating as if something was moving below. Each breath he took felt suffocating, his entire body paralyzed by fear. He tried to convince himself that it was just an illusion caused by exhaustion and stress. But with every passing second, the strange noises from beneath the floor grew louder and more distinct. Slowly, Charlie began to back away, the light from his phone casting a small, shaky glow in the room. Thick darkness swallowed everything around him, and the pale corners of the room seemed to shift and warp in a ghostly, unnatural way. It felt as though the entire house was coming alive, and he was nothing more than an unwelcome intruder. "Don't panic, Charlie," he whispered to himself, his voice echoing through the empty space. But the reassurance did little to calm the terror gnawing at him. Stories he had heard from the townspeople of Hawthorne Ridge crept into his mind, tales of trapped spirits, unsolved disappearances, and the inescapable darkness that clung to this cursed house. Each passing second seemed to confirm what the locals had always warned. There was something evil in this place, something that had been waiting for far too long. Charlie decided to head toward the window, hoping he could break the glass and escape. But just as his hand touched the windowsill, a sudden noise came from beneath the floor. It wasn't just the creaking anymore, it was a loud, deliberate knocking, as if someone or something was pounding from below. He jumped back, his eyes darting to the floor. The old wooden boards groaned, straining under the weight of time. But what was more horrifying was the unmistakable sensation that something was trying to break free from under the floor. Charlie bent down, his heart racing, his phone trembling in his hand, as the light revealed cracks in the floorboards. As he focused on one of the cracks, his breath hitched. From between the gaps, a pale, skeletal finger began to emerge. Long, deathly white fingers with shriveled, dry skin like that of a corpse slowly crawled up from beneath the floor, the nails scraping against the wood, creating a bone-chilling screech. Charlie stood frozen, paralyzed by terror. His eyes locked on the hand as it reached upward, the fingers twitching and clawing, desperate to escape from whatever darkness lay beneath. His throat tightened, unable to scream. Cold sweat poured down his face, his entire body refusing to move or breathe. He was trapped in the most horrifying reality he had never imagined, staring at the creeping hand of death itself. Then, a deep, guttural voice echoed from behind him. "You should not be here." Charlie jumped and spun around. From the shadows of the room, a figure emerged. It was a tall man with ghostly white skin, sunken eyes that were cold and devoid of life. He stood just a few steps away, his face expressionless. The clothes he wore were tattered, revealing patches of grayish skin beneath. The man's voice rang out again. each word piercing Charlie's mind like a dagger. You have come too close to the truth. Charlie instinctively took a step back, but his legs trembled unsteadily. He struggled to find words, but everything felt stuck in his throat. In front of him, the man took a step forward, his long, bony fingers reaching out as if to grab him. "You are not allowed to leave," he said, his voice dripping with a morbid tone. Charlie panicked and turned to sprint toward the window. But as he prepared to smash the glass to escape, a frigid gust of wind swept through, freezing him in place. He glanced back and saw the man's sunken eyes fixed on him, as if he were waiting for Charlie to get trapped in this web of darkness. Suddenly, a hand shot up from beneath the floorboards, gripping Charlie's ankle and pulling him toward the shadowy abyss. He screamed and thrashed, but that grip was unnaturally strong. In a desperate attempt, he kicked out with all his might, breaking free from that skeletal hold. He stumbled to the ground, gasping for breath, sweat pouring down his face. The man remained motionless, staring at Charlie with an empty gaze, saying nothing more. Not daring to look back at the hand that had emerged from the floor, Charlie scrambled to his feet and dashed toward the door. But when he grasped the doorknob to pull it open, it wouldn't budge, as if locked tight from the other side. In despair, Charlie pounded on the door, his heart racing wildly in his chest. The darkness in the house enveloped him, and he understood that he had come into contact with something horrifying. The rumors about this house, about the soul buried beneath the floor, had now become a terrifying reality that he never thought he would face. And now, Charlie realized he had to find a way to escape from this place before the darkness swallowed him forever. Charlie gasped for breath, leaning against the locked wooden door. Every attempt to open the door was futile, as if the house had come alive, imprisoning him inside. He had no choice but to confront this nightmare. His whole body trembled as he felt the biting cold of the house wrapping around him, each gust of icy wind seeping through the cracks, sending shivers down his spine. Inside, everything was eerily silent, but he knew he was not alone. Charlie turned his head, his gaze directed toward the staircase where the shadow of the eerie man still stood. His hollow eyes were empty, his bony hands hung limply at his sides, and his lifeless face was fixated on Charlie. No sound, no sudden movement, but that gaze was enough to make Charlie's heart race with fear. A faint sound echoed from beneath the floor, drawing his attention away from the man. Charlie crouched down to look, and he saw it again, the pale, cold hand slowly emerging through the floorboards. Its fingers trembled, clawing at the wood, making a creaking sound that numbed his heart. That hand, weak yet persistent, was trying to escape from the darkness below, like a call from the house's dark past. Charlie recoiled, the light from his phone illuminating the horrifying hand. He could see clearly the bony, grey fingers with nails that were chipped and cracked, as if they had been buried for decades. A wave of disgust and fear surged within him, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. The hand seemed to be searching, relentlessly trying to grip the floor to pull itself free. Then slowly, part of the arm began to reveal itself through the cracks. Charlie panicked and stumbled back toward the staircase, feeling as if his legs would give out beneath him. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself, trying to reassure his mind. But the truth lay stark before him, and nothing could change that. Just then, the mysterious man spoke, his voice deep and resonant throughout the house, as if it emanated from deep within the decaying walls. "You have come too close to the truth." Charlie felt as if the whole world was collapsing around him. The stories about the house he had once heard were no longer just rumors. He recalled the tales of the restless spirit buried beneath the floor, the unsolved murder case, and the curse that haunted this house. He understood that the hand he was seeing belonged to the man who had been brutally harmed many years ago. "You should not be here," the man's voice echoed once more, each word heavy like a nail driven into the silence. "You have touched upon something you were never meant to know." Charlie turned to look at the man. His whole body trembled, but he had to face him. I don't know anything. I just came to deliver food," Charlie stammered, his voice filled with panic. The man took another step toward him, his expression unchanged, only his pitch-black eyes and a twisted smile appearing on his pale face. "No one enters here and escapes. You have ventured too deep, and now you will pay the price." As soon as those words left his lips, the hand from beneath the floor suddenly reached up and grabbed Charlie's leg. He screamed in terror, feeling the cold hand tighten around his ankle like a death trap. He struggled, kicking with all his might, but that hand was too strong and unyielding. With every tightening grip, he felt the chill seeping into his very flesh. "Let me go," Charlie yelled, desperately trying to break free. He kicked harder, delivering rapid blows to the ghostly hand, and finally, it loosened its grip. He fell to the floor, gasping in panic. Cold sweat poured down his body, but he had no time to calm down. The man was still advancing, closer, and Charlie knew he had to escape at any cost. Charlie sprang up, his body still trembling, and dashed straight for the staircase. He knew the front door was locked, but there was still the window upstairs. That could be his only escape. His footsteps echoed with every step on the old wooden stairs, each one weighed down by the terror that surrounded him. He could hear the raspy laughter of the man resonating from below, further fueling his panic. Reaching the top of the stairs, Charlie spotted a door at the end of the hallway. The faint light from his phone illuminated the cracked walls, and the space around him was dark like an endless abyss. He had no time to hesitate. That door might be his last hope. But just as he touched the doorknob, another chilling sound erupted from beneath the floorboards, this time louder and clearer. Charlie felt the floor tremble violently, as if something was desperately trying to break free. Charlie paused in front of the door at the end of the hallway, his hands still trembling on the doorknob. The cold sensation from the floor below haunted him, as if that ghostly hand still gripped his ankle. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but the shrieks from beneath the floorboards grew louder. Something down there had awakened, and he knew time was running out. The door at the end of the hallway creaked open, and Charlie stepped into a small, empty room. The light from his phone dimly illuminated the dusty walls and peeling paint. The room had no furniture, just a single window looking outside, where the rain poured down like a deluge. He hurried to the window, hoping it would be his escape. But just as he placed his hand on the windowsill, a soft knock sounded from behind him. Charlie jumped, his heart pounding in his chest. In the empty room, the figure of the mysterious man appeared again, as if he had been watching Charlie's every move. The man's pale face seemed to glow in the darkness, his hollow and lifeless eyes staring straight at Charlie. He didn't say a word, just stood there, but his gaze was enough to make every hair on Charlie's body stand on end. Charlie stepped back, his back pressing against the cold wall. "What do you want?" he shouted desperately, his eyes wide with panic. "I only came here to deliver food. I don't know anything." The man took another step closer, his face still wearing that twisted smile. "You have touched the past." His deep, echoing voice resounded, as if it were coming from a distant place. "You should not have come here. It's not my fault." Charlie shouted in despair, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the gloomy atmosphere in the room. His heart raced, and he felt frozen in place before the terrifying presence of the man. He knew he was facing something that didn't belong to this world, something he had never imagined encountering in his life. The man stood still, his pale face and empty eyes staring intently at Charlie. "Do you know the story of this house?" His voice grew softer, yet it was filled with menace. "Do you know what happened here?" Charlie swallowed hard, a sense of paralysis spreading through his body. He recalled the snippets of tales the townsfolk of Hawthorne Ridge had shared, stories of a cursed house where the soul of a wronged man had haunted for many years. But no one truly knew the details of that murder, only vague rumors, whispers from those who had lived in the town. "This is the scene of a murder," the man continued, his eyes seemingly lost in the past. "A man was brutally wronged, and his soul has never found peace. He was betrayed, imprisoned, and then buried right beneath this floor." Charlie's eyes widened in horror as a wave of fear engulfed his mind. The man he was facing was the victim of a brutal murder. His soul was trapped here, unable to move on, and his resentment had turned this house into a cursed place. "And you," the man continued, his voice as cold as ice, "you have disturbed my peace. You have touched upon a secret that you were never meant to know." Charlie took another step back, but the wall behind him offered no escape. I didn't mean to intrude," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I was just doing my job. Please, let me go." The man sneered, his twisted smile becoming even more sinister. "No one steps foot in here and leaves," he whispered, his dark eyes fixed on Charlie. "You have ventured into a place you should never have entered." Suddenly, the door behind the man slammed shut, as if the house was swallowing all exits. Charlie felt his heart tighten, panic overwhelming him, as he realized he was truly trapped in this nightmare. Unexpectedly, a fierce scratching sound erupted from beneath the floor, louder than ever. Another hand shot up, and this time it wasn't just a hand, it was an entire arm, followed by a part of a pale, deathly white face slowly emerging from the cracks. The bony, filthy hand grasped the stairs, dragging its body up, inch by inch. Charlie screamed in panic, his heart feeling like it was about to leap out of his chest. He turned to look at the man, but he didn't move. He just stood there, watching Charlie's every move with his empty eyes. Charlie realized there wasn't just one trapped soul in this house. The horrors of the past had awakened, and now it was dragging Charlie down with it. In a state of utter panic, Charlie had no other choice. He lunged toward the window, crashing against the glass. The shards shattered, falling to the ground with a loud clatter, but he didn't care about the cuts or the blood flowing from his hands. He needed to escape immediately. With a leap, Charlie hurled himself out of the window, his body plummeting to the hard ground outside. Every part of him ached, but he couldn't afford to stop. The darkness within the house seemed to stretch out, trying to pull him back. Charlie stood up and ran as fast as he could, toward the dimly lit road ahead. His heavy footsteps echoed in the darkness, blending with the relentless sound of falling rain. He didn't dare look back, but in his mind, the image of the hand emerging from the floor and the lifeless face of the mysterious man remained vivid. Charlie plunged into the pitch-black night, his feet splashing through puddles and muddy patches along the uneven path. He didn't dare glance back, didn't want to confront the house he had just escaped from. Each step carried the pounding rhythm of a heart screaming in terror. The cold wind whistled through the leaves, blowing fiercely against his face, but all he could hear was his ragged breaths and the frantic beat of his heart. The rain continued to pour, heavy drops slapping against Charlie's face, but he felt nothing except the fear tightening in his chest. The darkness of the house loomed like a nightmare chasing him, refusing to let go. The deep, husky laughter of the mysterious man echoed in his mind. along with the creaking sound of hands from below the floor, making each stride feel heavier. "Don't stop, don't stop," Charlie muttered to himself, trying to keep his legs moving. He felt as if hundreds of eyes were watching him from the shadows of the surrounding forest. The invisible gaze of souls trapped in that haunted house, longing to pull him back. The road ahead, shrouded in the dim light of distant street lamps, appeared as a fragile glimmer of hope. Charlie knew that if he could reach it, he would be safe, free from the house and the haunting shadow. But the distance seemed to stretch endlessly, the road appearing to retreat further away each time he approached. He was gasping for breath, each inhale cut short by the terror squeezing in his chest. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him. Charlie realized he was no longer alone on this path. Those footsteps were not his own, they were heavy, slow, and filled with menace. He knew that the mysterious man was tracking him, pursuing him step by step. A chill ran down his spine, as if death were closing in behind him. "Run faster," Charlie urged himself, trying to squeeze every ounce of strength left in him. His legs ached, but the fear was too great to let him stop. He knew that if he slowed down, if he paused for even a second, the shadow of the man would catch up and drag him back into eternal darkness. Suddenly, from the forest beside him, a chilling whisper echoed, "Charlie." The voice was deep and elongated, as if it emanated from the depths of darkness, yet it rang clear in his ears. He flinched, his legs momentarily freezing. His gaze darted from side to side, but all he could see was darkness and the still silhouettes of trees. But the voice came again, this time closer, more sinister. "Charlie, don't run." Charlie screamed in despair, his legs propelling him forward once more. He tried to cover his ears, but that voice kept ringing in his head, repeating like a nightmare. The darkness around him seemed to come alive, chasing him with every step. The shadows from the house, the souls trapped and vengeful, seemed to reach out from the forest, wanting to pull him back into the nightmare. The footsteps behind him seemed to grow ever closer. Charlie didn't dare look back, but he could feel the shadow of the man nearing, very near. The man's heavy, cold sigh echoed in the air, each breath sapping the fresh air around Charlie. He knew he had to escape from this place immediately. In desperation, Charlie saw the streetlight shining more clearly. This was the road leading back to Hawthorne Ridge, the town he once thought was safe. He lunged towards the light, but just then, a cold hand touched his shoulder. Charlie jolted, his whole body freezing. The hand was icy, as rigid as the claws of death, tightening around his shoulder and pulling him back. His heart felt like it stopped, and his breath caught in his chest. He turned his head, his panic-filled eyes meeting those of the mysterious man. The man's pale face was only a few centimeters away, his black eyes like an endless abyss, and his twisted, haunting smile. "You can't escape from here, Charlie," the man whispered, his voice hissing like wind through a crack in a door. "The house has chosen you." Charlie screamed in fear, struggling to break free from the man's cold grip. He summoned all his strength, pushing forward and fleeing from that terrifying shadow. But the haunting memories of the house never vanished. He could feel the man's eyes still watching, even though he had left him behind. Finally, after a frantic run, Charlie burst into the light of the street lamp. The warm glow from Hawthorne Ridge enveloped him, bringing a fleeting sense of safety. He collapsed to the ground, panting, his body trembling from exhaustion and fear. As Charlie tried to stand up, he turned back to look at the house. From a distance, the old house still stood there, hazy in the rain. The dark windows resembled hollow, soulless eyes watching him, and he knew that the house would forever haunt him. Even though he had escaped from there, the haunting memories of the man and the trapped soul would never leave his mind. Charlie sat on the wet ground, panting as his body trembled from exhaustion and fear. The light from the street lamp in Hawthorne Ridge shone down like a salvation, but in his mind, the nightmare was far from over. The rain continued to pour, hitting his skin, but the chill from outside was nothing compared to the coldness of the haunting experience he had just endured. Charlie looked around, trying to regain his composure. In the distance, the haunted house still stood there, hazy in the rain, like a giant ghost watching him. He swallowed hard, unable to take his eyes off it. In his mind, horrifying images replayed vividly: the hand from under the floor, the terrifying whispers of the mysterious man, and the dreadful feeling of being chased through the dark night. But then a thought tightened his heart. Even though he had escaped from that house, he knew he was not truly safe. The haunting of the man's soul and the curse of the house still clung to him. What had happened inside was not just a mere nightmare. It was too real, and he felt that the haunting shadow of the house would continue to chase him, refusing to let go. Charlie stood up, his hands still trembling as he wiped the raindrops from his face. He had to get away from there, as far from that house as possible. He walked slowly, each step feeling heavy. Hawthorne Ridge seemed too quiet in the late night hours. The surrounding houses shrouded in darkness, and the road ahead eerily silent. As Charlie walked toward the town, his mind spun with thoughts about what had happened. Who was the soul of the man in that house? Why was he trapped in the darkness, unable to move on? And why did he say that the house had chosen him? As he approached the town center, a flicker of hope ignited when he saw the light from a coffee shop that was still open. Inside, warm lights illuminated a few people engaged in quiet conversation. Charlie felt life returning, and he hurried inside, filled with hope of finding comfort and help. A small bell chimed as the coffee shop door swung open. The warm atmosphere and the smell of fresh coffee eased Charlie's tension, at least for a moment. He made his way to the counter, his eyes wandering around the cozy little room. A few people were scattered at the tables, but no one paid him any attention. He stepped up to the counter and leaned forward, his weak voice rising. "Please, give me a cup of coffee." The barista turned around, smiling gently at him. But when her eyes met Charlie's, the smile quickly faded. Her gaze sharpened, and her expression shifted to one of strange concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've just gone through something terrible." Charlie sighed, feeling his whole body trembling uncontrollably. "I just escaped from a house on the edge of the woods on Ridgeway Road. Something terrible happened." As Charlie mentioned Ridgeway Road, the entire coffee shop seemed to fall silent. The barista stood still, and the other patrons, though trying not to look, clearly heard his words. The atmosphere shifted, becoming tense and heavy. The barista's expression turned anxious as she turned away to prepare the coffee for him. But Charlie could sense that what he had just said had stirred something unsettling. When the barista returned with the cup of coffee, she placed it on the counter without saying a word. Her gaze avoided his, and she quickly left, as if not wanting to be involved in his story. This only deepened Charlie's unease. It was clear that there was a significant secret about that house, and everyone in town knew it, yet no one wanted to mention it. Charlie sat down at a corner table, taking a sip of coffee. But the warmth of the drink couldn't chase away the chill of his haunting memories. He decided to ask a nearby patrona, frail old man who seemed familiar with the town about the house. "Excuse me," Charlie spoke up, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Do you know anything about the house on Ridgeway Road? I think something isn't right there." The old man looked up, staring at Charlie for a few seconds before sighing and shaking his head. "You shouldn't mention that place, especially at this hour," he said softly, his aged eyes revealing an unmistakable worry. "That house has been cursed for a long time." Charlie sat in silence, waiting for the old man's response. Finally, the old man continued, his voice somber. "More than 40 years ago, a man was brutally murdered in that very house. His assailant buried his body beneath the floor and poured concrete over it to conceal the crime. The case was never solved, and since then, the house has become abandoned. People say that the spirit of the murdered man cannot find peace. Anyone who enters that house will never be at rest." Charlie shuddered at the story, feeling the chill return. "I met him, the spirit of that man. He said the house has chosen me." The old man furrowed his brow and shook his head. "If the house has chosen you, then it will not let you go. You need to leave here immediately." Charlie felt a wave of fear swell within him. Even though he had escaped the house, the haunting and resentment of that man still clung to him. And now, he knew that the house would never let him go. After hearing the old man's story in the cafe, Charlie felt as though the ground beneath him was collapsing. He rested his head on the table, his hands still trembling and cold sweat trickling down his forehead. "The house has chosen you." Those words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. He didn't know what to do or if he could escape this nightmare. He sat there, his vacant eyes staring out the window, where the rain continued to pour down endlessly. The dim streetlight cast a faint glow on the glass, creating streaks of light on the table that resembled bloodstains. Hawthorne Ridge was unusually quiet at night, but for Charlie, this silence only added to the suffocating atmosphere. What he had just experienced in that house haunted him, and he knew its curse would continue to cling to him. "You will never escape from here." The voice of the mysterious man echoed in his mind, reviving every horrifying moment when that cold hand tightened around him. The imprisoned spirit, the man buried beneath the floorboards, and that sorrowful house soul of it enveloped Charlie's life like a dark fog from that moment on. Suddenly, the ringing of a phone shattered the silence in the cafe. Charlie jumped, realizing his phone was vibrating. The screen displayed an unknown number, but in his panic and exhaustion, he answered without thinking. Charlie, the voice on the other end, was cold and familiar. He felt the blood in his veins freeze. It was the voice of the man from the house. "Did you think you could escape?" The voice whispered, stretching out like a poisonous wind. "You belong to that house. The house has chosen you." Panic surged within Charlie more powerfully than ever. He slammed the phone down on the table, as if that could end everything, but the haunting whisper still echoed in the air. He stood up abruptly, his frantic eyes searching for an escape. He had to do something, had to break this curse, had to act before it was too late. He turned to face the old man sitting nearby. "Do you know how to break this curse?" Charlie asked, his voice filled with desperation. The old man stared at Charlie for a long moment, his deep and sorrowful eyes seeming to understand the horror Charlie was experiencing. After a moment of silence, he sighed, his voice low. "I've heard about this for many years. Once the house has chosen someone, their soul will never find peace. You are the next one. But there is a way." Charlie felt a spark of hope igniting within him. "How do I escape it?" The old man frowned, his eyes locked onto Charlie. "The soul of the man who was harmed has been trapped in that house for too long, and his resentment is the source of the curse. You must find a way to break the curse by freeing that soul. Only then can you escape the endless cycle of the house." Charlie felt a wave of fear wash over him. He had tried to escape from that soul, But now, to survive, he had to face it once more. "How do I free him?" he asked, his voice filled with anxiety. The old man lowered his voice, as if revealing a dark secret. "You must return to the house. Beneath the bathroom floor, where the man was harmed and buried, there is an object that he has always yearned for. It is his heart, not literally, but a symbolic object representing his soul. If you can find it and take it out of the house, that soul will be freed. But remember, the house does not want you to leave with it." Charlie felt his heart race. Return to the house, just the thought of it made him want to run as far away as possible. But if he didn't do that, he would never escape this nightmare. The house would continue to haunt him until he was completely consumed. "The house will not let you go easily," the old man continued, as if reading Charlie's thoughts. "It will do everything to keep you there. Be careful." Charlie felt a chill run down his spine. This curse was not something he could easily escape. But he also knew he had no other choice. He had to return to that house, face the horror once more to free himself. He didn't know what would happen when he returned, but he understood that this was his only chance to end the curse and escape the relentless torment. As Charlie drew closer, the silhouette of the house emerged through the thick rain. It stood there, dark and cold, like a monster in the night. His heart pounded, but he tried to remain calm. He stepped onto the porch, and the front door creaked open slowly with a terrifying groan. Inside, the darkness welcomed him back like an old friend, but this time, he was no longer a frightened runaway. He had returned, and this time, he would end this nightmare once and for all. Charlie stepped into the old house on Ridgeway Road once more, the cold and gloomy air enveloping him as the door slammed shut behind him. The darkness inside the house felt like a death trap, waiting for him to step in and tighten its grip. Despite the fear still clinging to him, this time he was determined not to let it control him. He had to find a way to end the curse, to uncover the heart of the man who had been wronged. Charlie's footsteps echoed in the empty house. He passed through the dusty living room, the cracked walls, and the abandoned kitchen with its shattered windows. Everything remained as he had seen it before, but there was a strange feeling, as if the atmosphere of the house had changed. It was not just a house, it was a living entity, watching and waiting for each of his steps. He stopped in front of the bathroom door at the end of the hallway, knowing that the imprisoned spirit of the man was buried beneath the floor. A chill ran down his spine as he opened the door. Inside, the small room was dark and still reeked of dampness and decay. Every detail of the previous nightmare flooded back. The creaking of the floorboards, the pale hand reaching out from beneath the floor, and the empty gaze of the mysterious man. Charlie took a deep breath and stepped inside, focusing on the task at hand. He knelt down, feeling the cold, hard floor beneath him. The echoes of his heartbeat were loud in his ears as he began to search for anything that might resemble the heart the old man had mentioned. He ran his fingers over the grimy surface, trying to push aside the fear threatening to overwhelm him. Suddenly, he felt something unusual unevenness beneath the surface. With a surge of adrenaline, he began to scrape away the dirt and grime, revealing a small trapdoor hidden beneath the floorboards. His heart raced as he pulled at the edges, the old wood creaking in protest. With a final effort, he managed to pry the door open, revealing a dark void below. A putrid smell wafted up, causing him to gag. Charlie hesitated, the urge to flee clashing with the necessity to confront the darkness head-on. He took a deep breath and descended into the shadows, determined to find what lay at the heart of the curse. As he descended, the darkness thickened around him, and he could barely see his hands in front of him. The dampness clung to his skin like a second layer, and he felt the weight of the house pressing down on him. In the depths of the darkness, he heard whispers, fragments of anguished voices that echoed with despair. They grew louder, drowning out his thoughts, and he could almost make out words: "Release me, set me free." The chilling plea sent shivers down his spine, but Charlie pressed on. He had to find that heart. He had to set the spirit free. The whispers guided him deeper into the darkness, and he felt a strange pull, as if the house itself were directing him. Finally, he stumbled upon a small, dimly lit space at the bottom of the trapdoor. In the center, half buried under the debris, lay an object that glinted faintly in the low light. Charlie's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it, a small, heart-shaped locket, tarnished and covered in dirt. He reached out, fingers trembling as he brushed away the grime, revealing intricate engravings on its surface. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy shot through him, and the whispers grew frantic. "Take it, you must take it." Charlie clutched the locket tightly, feeling a connection to the tortured spirit. The house trembled around him, and he realized he had to leave now. With the locket in hand, he scrambled back up to the trapdoor, pulling himself out with a sense of urgency. As he stood in the bathroom again, he could hear the house protesting, the walls creaking as if they were alive, angry at his defiance. He dashed out of the bathroom, heart pounding in his chest. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the darkness seemed to claw at him, trying to pull him back. But with a newfound determination, he sprinted toward the front door, knowing that he had to escape the clutches of the cursed house. As he reached for the doorknob, he could feel a powerful force trying to hold him back, but he would not let it win. Charlie threw open the door and stumbled out into the rain-soaked night, the locket still clutched in his hand. The darkness of the house loomed behind him, but he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He had the heart of the man who had suffered for too long, and now it was time to end the curse. He bent down to the floor, where the cracks had previously revealed themselves. His heart pounded, but he knew he had to continue. According to the old man's words, the heart that the man's spirit longed for was the key to freeing him and freeing himself as well. He carefully lifted each wooden plank, his hands trembling as he pulled debris from the floor. When the last floorboard was lifted, Charlie saw it, a small object wrapped in old black fabric. It lay still in the damp earth, as if it had been buried for decades. He reached out, his hand shaking as he took hold of the fabric and pulled it from its hiding place. His heart tightened, not only from fear but also from the heavy feeling of hatred surrounding this object. When he opened the fabric, inside was a small wooden box covered in dust and mold. Charlie exhaled, trying to regain his composure as his fingers touched the lid of the box. He opened it, and inside was an old necklace with a silver pendant in the shape of a heart, now rusted and worn from time. This is what he was searching for, Charlie whispered to himself, clearly feeling the strange and vengeful energy emanating from the necklace. This was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of the man's soul, the thing that connected him to this world. Suddenly, from behind him, Charlie heard a heavy footstep and a cold breath, as if the air in the room had just been sucked out. He turned around, and this time, the mysterious man appeared clearly, no longer just a shadow as before. He stood right in the middle of the room, his black, deep-set eyes staring intensely at Charlie, devoid of life. His pale face twisted into a grin full of hatred. "You cannot take it away," the man hissed, his voice echoing throughout the room. "You have disturbed my rest. You will pay the price." Charlie jumped to his feet, his hands still gripping the necklace tightly. "I didn't come here to harm you. I just want to free you," he replied, his voice filled with panic, but also determination. "This house has held you for too long. It's time for you to rest." The man took another step toward Charlie, his bony hands reaching out as if to grab him. "You don't understand anything," he shouted, his voice full of rage. "This house chose me, just as it has chosen you. No one can leave. I am trapped here forever." The room seemed to tremble as his scream echoed. The air became even more suffocating, and the floor began to crack beneath Charlie's feet. The darkness appeared to come alive, wrapping around the room, and he felt as if he was about to be swallowed whole. But Charlie refused to panic. He tightened his grip on the necklace in his hand, feeling the power emanating from it, and understood that this was the key to breaking the curse. He looked straight at the man, his eyes no longer filled with fear. "I will take you out of here," Charlie said, his voice firm. "Your soul does not belong to this house anymore." The man paused, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes, but it was also filled with doubt. He did not believe that anyone could free him after so many years of being trapped. Charlie didn't hesitate any longer. He turned and dashed toward the door, still gripping the necklace tightly. The house let out a wail, like a monster in pain for losing a part of itself. The floor trembled beneath him, but Charlie didn't stop. He knew that getting this necklace out of the house was the only way to free the man and himself. As he ran down the stairs, the thick darkness surrounded him, but the faint light from the front door kept his hope alive. Charlie took a deep breath and launched himself toward the door he once thought would never open. When Charlie opened the door, a strong gust of wind hit his face, bringing with it the pouring rain outside. He rushed out, the necklace still clutched tightly in his hand, and for the first time he felt freedom. The house stood there, desolate and dark, but there were no more wails or ghosts chasing him. The figure of the mysterious man began to fade, as if he was dissolving along with the curse of the house. His gaze softened, no longer filled with anger and hatred. He looked at Charlie one last time, his eyes filled with profound gratitude. "At last, I am free," the man whispered, his voice softer, imbued with a sense of release. And then he vanished into the air, like a thin mist dissipating before the rain. Charlie breathed a sigh of relief, collapsing to the ground as the rain drenched him. Yet he no longer felt the chill that had gripped him before. He had done it. He had freed the trapped soul and shattered the curse that had haunted the old house for so long. The weight of terror that had burdened him began to lift, replaced by an unexpected warmth. As the rain poured, Charlie reflected on the journey he had endured, the fear and despair that had almost consumed him, the memories of the sinister presence in the house, the whispering shadows, and the dread-filled nights haunted his thoughts. Yet he realized he had faced those fears and emerged stronger. The nightmare was over, but the haunting memories would forever linger in his mind, etched like a scar that would never fully heal. He knew he would carry the weight of that experience with him, a reminder of the darkness he had encountered and the strength he had found within himself to confront it. Each drop of rain that fell upon him felt like a cleansing, washing away the remnants of fear while leaving behind the resilience he had gained. As Charlie made his way back to town, the sky began to lighten. Pale rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the world around him, signaling a new beginning. The vibrant colors of nature seemed more vivid, as if the world had been reborn along with him. He could see the glistening droplets on the leaves and hear the gentle rustling of the trees, each sound a melody of hope. He knew he would never completely escape the darkness, but at least he had triumphed over it. The house no longer held him in its grasp, and he felt a sense of empowerment. With each step he took, he felt the ground solid beneath him, a testament to his resilience. He had faced the abyss and had not only survived, but had emerged with a deeper understanding of himself. And now, he could continue living, even though the scars of that horrific night would always remain in his heart. They would serve as a reminder of the strength he had summoned, the bonds he had forged with those he loved, and the battles he had fought not just against the darkness outside, but also against the shadows that dwelled within. As he walked toward the town, he felt a sense of purpose igniting within him. The experiences of the past had shaped him, and he was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that he had the courage to face it all.